So just a few things that I'm sure this audience knows, and I'll go through very quickly, about where we're at in terms of the healthcare industry and what's going on. We have the aging population. The rate of new knowledge is, unlimited, and it just keeps going up and up. There's increased spending worldwide on healthcare as a percent of GDP, and there's increase in innovation investment. I'm going to say a few things about state investment because that's new. But the National Institute of Health, which you discussed at the end, just an aside real quickly, we're arguing that we don't change the system that we have, this peer-reviewed, 44 years old to get your first grant, but that Congress add $3 billion for young innovators, first-time grant recipients. And of that, we'd like to see half of it go to that group and the other half, $1.5 billion, go to translational work. So add something new that's permanent, and you don't have to fight the system and say we want to arguably dumb down the system so it's easier to get a grant. Just put the grants where they should be given. So that's what we're arguing from the San Diego perspective. The unfavorable parts, the regulatory, pendulum swings back and forth, and it's certainly back at the moment. The cost containment politics are enormous, including this year as the presidential race heats up. This industry, which is both loved and hated, will be front and center in the hate part. The love part comes when you're sick. Financing of early stage is really challenging, and that's what I'm going to spend my last part talking to you about. And of course, the worldwide competition, regional and otherwise, is greatly expanding. So this is Proposition 71 that the voters passed in 2005, 2004 actually, with 60% approval to spend $3 billion in California, invest $3 billion in stem cell or regenerative medicine research. It was driven by a guy named Bob Klein, whose son has diabetes, type 1 diabetes, and a confluence of things came together to get this passed. Nancy Reagan and Ronald Reagan's passing, and Nancy stepping out on stem cells, and then Christopher Reeve, Superman, had filmed commercials before he died, and those ran right at the end. And so Proposition 71 was passed, and we moved forward with that. As a result of that $3 billion, other states like Texas did $3 billion in cancer. Massachusetts got a major $1 billion-plus initiative going. But for the first time ever, states started investing in a new type of infrastructure. Not roads and bridges and the typical things, but their research institutes, pushing more money and making sure that our research institutes, wherever they are, remain competitive and fill some of the gap. So I'm a big proponent of this. I think it's a wise thing to do. I'd rather see this than tax cuts and R&D tax credits, which is not a popular thing to say, but I think it's more important because this is where our future ideas will come from. I can talk more about that. So now I want to switch gears and spend the last 4 slides talking about the world as I sort of view it, along with a very important person who serves on my board. His name is Pedro Quattrocasas, and he's a giant in the industry, Hopkins graduate who was at SmithKline and, at Glaxo as head of R&D, and then moved to Warner Lambert, and has done about, 40 drugs, including Lipitor, along with Ronnie Cresswell. But Pedro probably has as much experience as anybody in this industry and one of the revered guys. He's retired now, living in Rancho Santa Fe, but he's been on my board for 12 years. And we have discussed over and over again some of the challenges in industry. So the thoughts that we're going to talk about next are sort of a combination of Pedro and my own experiences, having been an employee of large pharmaceutical companies, Johnson & Johnson for 10 years, and then starting a biotech company, and now running a nonprofit trying to help finance innovation. So up until about the 1970s, almost all innovation occurred and was funded by large corporations. It occurred because they had a president of R&D, and that president had a budget, and the CEO of the corporation really just let them go. And they would pursue science until they thought they made a discovery. Then they'd hand it over to development, and the company would try to put that product on the market. These are generalities. They also delivered most of those to the marketplace. They had their own sales, marketing, everything was done internally in development, and it was an internal model. Then beginning in the 1980s, 1980, the Bayh-Dole legislation passed, which said research institutions could own the intellectual property from the grants they received and didn't have to pay anybody anything. They could keep whatever they got for it. And that revolutionized, and I think brought about, the biotechnology and high-tech revolution. Because for the first time, faculty could make an invention and spin a company out and get it started. The second thing that started to happen is, unlike the original model, but over time, not in the 80s. In the 80s, we all built our own infrastructure. We built vivariums and wet labs and pilot plants and manufacturing, all because that's how we were trained. And there weren't any places to go get the work done. So we put hundreds of millions in each company, each idea, into bricks and mortar to use once, basically. So as my vivarium was so critical, I had 40 people in there, and the minute we got the preclinical stuff all done, guess what? We had to move on and start building our clinical team. Well, I didn't let those 40 people go because we had to come up with something else. So they sort of marched in place and spent money and did things that were completely unproductive. And the same is true of our manufacturing, everything. You just cycled through until you hoped you got a product on the market. Then you were ready to go try and do it again. So the first outsourcing started for these biotechs, and the first one was toxicology. We all said, okay, GLP tox, let's do that outside. And then a little bit of clinical. But I remember the head of one of our most successful biotech companies standing up in front of a biocom meeting and saying to all of us, whatever you do, do not outsource your clinical trials. It almost killed us. It almost killed us. And so we all went home and started hiring like crazy. Well, eventually we all got over that and realized that CROs actually do a better job, more cost effective, and more experienced than we in fact were. So things started to happen in that middle circle. But when it came to delivery of these, none of the biotechs could go it alone. So we had this new invention called the co-partnering model. Co-develop, co-promote, co-whatever, that was created. Sort of an unholy alliance. I remember at J&J when Amgen came in, you know, we got down at the meeting and all sort of laughed and said, wow, these guys are completely out of it. They have no clue. They'll never do any of these things. But that was the late 70s. And J&J and Amgen made a deal, as you know, and probably is why Amgen was able to get through the challenges they had. But along the bottom, I show how this innovation was financed. So from the grant funding, we had some angel funding, venture capital, and then after you did your partnering deal, you went public, or maybe just before, but you had a constant stream and a need to keep financing and financing. So this model's been with us now for 25 plus years. It is all the rage today, all the rage. Every pharmaceutical company comes to visit me and says, Duane, we're the best partner in the world. Here's all our track record. Here's all our people. But the truth is, they're all really difficult because the cultures between those two organizations are vastly different and not correctable. Even if you like the people, and I did. I'd done dozens of partnerships. I liked them all. But I couldn't hold it together because things were just day and night in terms of their incentives and motivations and our incentives and motivations. And I think anybody will tell you that. One of my colleagues said, you know, the best partnerships are marriage, and half of those end in divorce. So I've never forgotten that. That's probably a valid point. So what's wrong with this model? Well, the first one is what Pedro coined. He said the reason that the go-it-alone model failed is we started to bring in from General Electric and other well-managed companies this concept of management by objectives. And we tried to apply it to research. And then marketing guys like me got in on the act. Quarterly reviews, Gantt charts, nothing survived. Everything got killed, and killed early, because as a marketing person, I didn't want this brand new stuff these guys were working on. I wanted what we had a little better so we could get market share. So we constantly wanted the Me Too's, but a little bit better, and we fought, and we were far more articulate than the scientists. So we won the day over and over again, to the point where both pharma and bio have really destroyed the ability to let people pursue the science they believe in and then pick it up and see if you can commercialize the product. Now it is throw everything at the front end, which is impossible to get through, as most of you know, and at the back end. So Amgen's EPO forbid the group to work on the product. Forbidden. And the Chinese lead who did it said he didn't understand English. And it's a true story. The Skunk Works got EPO through the system, but it was killed multiple times. Somebody told me every major drug they worked on was killed at least 3 times, and it's killed by this model. Second problem, the valley of death. So as venture capital got more and more sophisticated, in the beginning it was just kind of a hobby, and they saw these excited scientists, and they said, let's throw some money at it, see what they do. That changed. You get your fingers burned, you realize that curing cancer in rats is not the same as humans, and all that stuff wound up. And what started as kind of a hobby with wealthy individuals changed to a real business. So now instead of having a $100 million fund, the fund was $500 million, but the number of partners didn't change. So the deployment of capital meant you had to do big deals, not little deals that need a little bit of help to see if you could get it to the next step. So this chasm, valley of death, that I live in every day at Connect, every day, is just gigantic, especially in therapeutics. You can get a little bit of angel money to do the devices and diagnostics, but therapeutics, it's like 20 years, and which one are you going to tell me was the model that it works? Because there isn't any of them that you can point to and say, had you invested here because of this and this, you'd have made money. It's just not true. So the valley of death is growing, and this is a big challenge for us nationally. The culture clash I already talked about, that is never going to get fixed. It's impossible to fix it. You do the best you can, but they're 2 different cultures, and they always will be. But by far, the biggest problem is what I call bet the ranch. So this model for the biotech company is 100% home run. First time, out of the park, got to hit it. And that happens so rare, that most of the thousands and thousands of companies modeled after this, failed. And they don't fail, go away, fail. They get merged and acquired and so on. But this model of Bet the Ranch says you will go into a brand new innovative product, and you will, after getting any kind of a peak of efficacy in phase 2, go straight to phase 3, do not pass go, and otherwise you're out. You can't say to the market, well, I think we'll do another couple phase 2s to confirm. Instead, we run in and, a little subgroup here worked, but we didn't quite have the end that we needed to prove it. You know all the stories. I open the paper every day and I cringe because there's one after another with a setback. Yesterday it was ISIS with their cholesterol product. So this Bet the Ranch model is insane. I can't point to any single company and tell them you should have done that and you would have been successful. That's the recipe. And I think that's what's going to eventually kill us in the industry. It's just not sustainable. I heard you talk about Posner. All right, now I'm going to talk about picking up. Posner describes this. And he sort of says, but he doesn't, I think, understand from the inside where these red flags are. These are the things that are killing this model. So my view is this model is pretty much finished. The pipeline is there, number of companies coming through, but it's going to change. Here's where I think, well, a little anecdote here. There are the known knowns. These are the things we know. There are the known unknowns. These are the things we know we don't know. But there are also the unknown unknowns. And this is what kills us in those bet the ranch modes. These are things we don't know until we do the studies. And because we have zero margin for error, we blow up at the end of that. Only a strong partner who is absolutely committed to redo it or a frothy market gets us through in history. So that was a quote by our former Secretary of Defense talking about Iraq. And the analogy is good. He came out of the pharma business.